Get ready to unlock the gates to 15 infamous celebrity estates that Tinseltown desperately tried to bury. Beyond the velvet ropes and the glimmering exteriors of the most opulent properties in the hills, a sinister reality lurks in the shadows. We aren't just talking about fading memories or dusty old scandals. We are talking about actual, tangible presences that refuse to move on. These are heavy, unseen energies that cling to the architecture trapped eternally in the very rooms where horrific tragedies unfolded, or where the obsession with stardom wasn't enough to buy a peaceful afterlife. Forget about the urban legends you hear whispered around a campfire or read on a conspiracy forum. What you are about to hear are verified, documented testimonies from terrified owners, shaken household staff and guests who walked into these multi-million-dollar mansions expecting paradise only to run into freezing cold spots where the air stands still, disembodied voices echoing in vacant hallways and shadow figures that dissolve the moment you look at them. However, what makes these particular Hollywood hauntings chill you to the bone isn't simply the paranormal activity or the jump scares. It is the direct blood-soaked connection to the very real crimes, brutal murders and heartbreaking mysteries that took place on these expensive hardwood floors. The most unsettling and aggressive phenomena have been recorded in the dream homes where violent, untimely deaths stained the foundation, leaving a mark that goes far deeper than Hollywood folklore, seemingly embedding itself into the drywall, the soil, and the very soul of the structures. We are covering everything from the gruesome aftermath of the Manson family's most infamous rampage to the glitzy palaces where deceased icons simply refuse to give up the spotlight, creating properties that real estate brokers lie about to sell and that unsuspecting buyers only figure out after the ink is dry and the lights go out. The fear is so intense that some A-list celebrities have abandoned these cursed keys just months after moving in, willing to take a massive financial loss just to escape. Others have brought in the heavy hitters, Catholic exorcists, renowned paranormal investigators and spiritual cleansers, often finding that the spirits are too strong to be evicted. The entities patrolling Hollywood's bleakest zip codes seem determined to keep their tragic narratives alive, regardless of how many times the kitchen is remodeled or how much white sage is burned to purify the air. Tonight, we are ripping the caution tape off the 15 most haunted celebrity compounds in Los Angeles history. The specific locations that the Hollywood public relations machine has fought to keep out of the headlines. These are not just buildings made of stone and glass. They are active portals to nightmares that never ended, featuring a cast of spectral celebrities who once saw their names on marquees and now roam the dark corridors. Let us kick things off with arguably the most notorious address in the history of the entertainment industry. This is a location where the walls are soaked in the memory of a night that changed pop culture forever. My name is Dennis Hurst, and I hold the grim distinction of being the last person to walk out of 10,050 Cielo Drive. Number 1 on our list, the Beverly Hills Slaughterhouse, 10,050. Sitting high up in the isolated winding roads of Benedict Canyon in Beverly Hills, the estate at 10,050 was designed to be a sanctuary offering sweeping cinematic views of Los Angeles. Instead of a dream home, it transformed into the backdrop for a massacre so savage that the mere mention of the street name became shorthand for pure evil. This is the hallowed ground where the heavily pregnant actress Sharon Tate, along with 4 of her friends, was ruthlessly butchered by brainwashed members of the Charles Manson cult on August 9th, 1969. Before the carnage, the French country-style residence constructed in 1942 boasted a glittering resume of high-profile tenants. It served as the bachelor pad for stars like Candice Bergen and the music mogul Terry Melcher, and rumours persist that Melcher's previous residency was the actual reason Charles Manson targeted the house, looking for revenge against the industry that rejected him. However, the moment the murders occurred, the property's aura shifted from glamorous to grotesque, absorbing a dark, heavy energy that never lifted. For decades following the crime, private security teams and maintenance workers reported hearing sounds that defied logic, muffled, agonizing screams, desperate whispers, begging for mercy, and weeping that seemed to vibrate out of the plaster itself. Guests and visitors consistently described being hit with a wave of nausea and dread the second they stepped through the door, with many fleeing the premises before the sun even went down. People always said the house had a memory that it never let go of the blood, claimed a former security officer who patrolled the grounds back in the 1970s. I have seen hardened men guys who had seen it all absolutely refuse to walk into specific bedrooms or corners of the house. They couldn't articulate what it was, only that the atmosphere felt wrong, threatening, and intensely heavy. The most frequent and heartbreaking sighting was the apparition of a pregnant woman wearing a nightgown widely believed to be the spirit of Sharon Tate, lingering by the windows or standing near the living room area where her life was stolen. One living caretaker swore he saw her manifest repeatedly over a span of 3 months, always wearing the same bewildered, terrified expression, as if she still didn't understand what had happened to her. The original structure remained standing until 1994, when the new owner, Alvin Weintraub, bulldozed it to the ground and constructed a massive new Mediterranean mansion, changing the address to 10,066 Cielo Drive in a desperate bid to wipe the slate clean, but simply changing the facade, and the numbers failed to purify the cursed soil. The occupants of the new mega mansion still reported sudden drops in temperature, bizarre noises in the dead of night, and the unshakable sensation of being observed by unseen eyes. You could scrub the floors until they sparkled, but the air itself still screams, admitted a former housekeeper who worked in the newly built residence. There is a thickness to the atmosphere in certain wings of the house, like walking through invisible sticky cobwebs that cling to your skin and refuse to brush off. It feels like something is there, wanting you to acknowledge the horror that took place on that dirt. The estate has cycled through multiple owners since the reconstruction, with some buyers lasting only a few short months before putting the for sale sign back up. Modern real estate agents usually try to gloss over the land's history, but the sheer volume of paranormal activity makes maintaining that code of silence nearly impossible. But Manson wasn't satisfied with the chaos he caused that first night. The bloodlust carried over into the next evening. Nightmare number 2. The La Bianca residence, located at 3301 Waverley Drive. Less than 24 hours after the Tate massacre, the Manson family descended upon Los Feliz at 3301 Waverley Drive, subjecting grocery store executive Leno LaBianca and his wife Rosemary to a similarly gruesome fate. While the infamous Cielo Drive mansion was bulldozed to erase its dark history, the La Bianca residence remains standing in 2026, a silent monument to the tragedy. From the curb, it looks like just another Spanish-style home, its unassuming exterior completely betraying the absolute nightmare that unfolded within those walls. The deed to the La Bianca house has swapped hands more times than a hot potato since the murders, with every single buyer running for the hills after encountering unexplainable and terrifying phenomena. Residents report bone-chilling cold spots that migrate through the home, specifically paralysing the living room where Leno took his last breath and the bedroom where Rosemary was brutally slain. One former occupant described the sensation as walking through a freezer door left open in the middle of a Los Angeles heatwave, a piercing chill that defies the summer sun. But the temperature drops are nothing compared to the guests. Multiple owners swear they have seen dark, looming shadow figures lurking at the foot of their beds or hovering in door frames. These aren't just tricks of the light. They are distinct, menacing silhouettes that vanish the second you look straight at them, only to creep back into the corner of your eye. These dark manifestations are frequently accompanied by the hush of ghostly whispers that cut out abruptly the moment a living person walks into the room. It felt like the house itself was glaring at you, explained one traumatised ex-owner who barely lasted 7 months before dumping the property for a massive financial loss just to get out. They reported heavy footsteps thumping on the second floor when the house was completely empty, and their family dog would whimper and refuse to cross the threshold of certain rooms. The most terrifying detail is waking up at 3 a.m. to the scratching sound of someone writing on the walls, a chilling echo of how the Manson family scribbled messages in the victim's own blood. Perhaps even worse are the reports of phantom odours that assault the senses without warning, filling the hallways with nausea-inducing smells. Residents speak of the sharp copper tang of fresh blood suddenly filling the air, followed by a cloying, sickly sweet stench that paranormal experts identify as the distinct rot of death. These aggressive smells manifest in specific corners of the home before dissipating without a trace, leaving the occupants shaken. Because of this intense reputation, the place is a real estate nightmare despite sitting in a prime million-dollar location. Agents try to scrub the history from the listing descriptions, but in the information age, prospective buyers figure it out and usually flee once they connect the address to its dark past. The brave souls who do buy it usually snatch it up for pennies on the dollar, thinking they have scored a killer investment, only to put the for sale sign back up 12 months later because they can't handle the nights. One researcher dedicated to the case put it best: some structures don't just witness history, they absorb the tragedy into the drywall. The LaBianca home doesn't just remember the carnage of that night. It seems trapped in a perpetual horrific cycle, replaying the terror of that August night over and over, locking that dark energy into a loop that refuses to fade away. Now let's pivot to the glitz and glamour of the ultimate Hollywood haunt. The people who founded United Artists Studio, including Charlie Chaplin, all spent time at this next location. Coming in at number 3 is the legendary Pickfair Estate in Beverly Hills, which was once the 56-acre compound shared by silent film icons Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks. They were Hollywood's very first power couple, the original royalty of Tinseltown. Built way back in 1919, this mansion wasn't just a home. It was the epicenter of celebrity culture, rolling out the red carpet for icons ranging from Albert Einstein and aviation pioneer Amelia Earhart to literary giant F. Scott Fitzgerald and actual royalty like the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. When Mary Pickford passed in 1979, the property bounced around until 1988, when corporate raider Meshullam Rickless bought it for his wife, pop starlet Pia Zadora. Then came the scandal that rocked the preservation world. Zadora bulldozed nearly the entire historic structure, publicly claiming it was eaten up by termites. However, insiders and preservationists knew that was just a cover story. The real reason for the demolition was far more sinister. Years later, Zadora came clean. The mansion was possessed, plain and simple. We tried to tough it out, she admitted, but the activity was relentless. They were plagued by phantom footsteps echoing through empty halls and heavy doors slamming shut by invisible hands, causing the housekeeping staff to walk off the job in terror. According to Zadora and her household staff, the primary culprit was a spectral woman in a flowing white gown. This figure was believed to be the spirit of Mary Pickford herself, often materialising on the grand staircase or lingering in the master suite that used to be hers. The ghost seemed to get angry whenever Zadora tried to renovate, becoming more active, as if she was furious about the changes to her beloved sanctuary. It wasn't just angry spirits, it was a never-ending ghost party, with residents reporting the faint sounds of 1920s jazz and roaring laughter as if the golden age soirees never ended. Maids would hear the crystal clink of champagne toasts and chatter in the next room, only to walk in and find dead silence and empty space. She didn't want to be forgotten, and frankly, she isn't noted a long-time staff member. A groundskeeper who worked the estate during the Zadora era pointed out that Miss Pickford built that house at the absolute peak of her fame. It was her entire identity, so it makes perfect sense that she would refuse to vacate the premises even after taking her final bow. Tearing down Pickfair made Zadora a pariah among Hollywood historians, but she maintained that the intense haunting had made the house completely unlivable. Ironically, the wrecking ball didn't banish the spirits. The paranormal activity reportedly persisted even after the new structure went up. This suggests that the haunting wasn't just in the walls, but deep in the soil of the estate itself. It was attached to the land, not just the bricks and mortar. The modern mansion sitting there today looks nothing like the original Pickfair, yet guests still freeze up in sudden cold pockets and catch the unmistakable scent of Mary Pickford's signature rose perfume. And if you look too closely into the mirrors, you might just catch a glimpse of that woman in white fading in and out of existence. Moving on to number 4, we head to 2400 Laurel Canyon Boulevard to explore the mystery of the Harry Houdini estate. Back in 1919, the legendary escape artist Harry Houdini dropped a fortune on this Laurel Canyon estate, transforming a standard property into a mysterious labyrinth fit for a magician. It became his personal wonderland, retrofitted with secret passages behind bookcases, hidden chambers, and a massive deep water tank where he rehearsed his most dangerous underwater stunts. Although the master of illusion actually met his end in Detroit in 1926, rumour has it his spirit bypassed the Midwest and returned straight to the Hollywood home he cherished most. Following his untimely death, his heartbroken widow Bess hosted intense seances at the estate every single Halloween for 10 years, desperate to drag her husband back from the void. They had established a secret code word while he was alive to verify his identity from the afterlife, but despite her decade of trying, that specific message never came through the static. However, insiders believe that her relentless attempts to punch a hole through the spiritual veil might have accidentally ripped open a permanent paranormal doorway right on the ground. Every owner who has held the deed since has reported bizarre, unexplainable phenomena that feel suspiciously like Houdini continues to obsess over illusions and escape artists from beyond the grave. We are talking about dead bolted doors swinging open on their own, and household objects vanishing from a counter, only to reappear days later in a completely different wing of the house. The most chilling detail is how the water faucets blast on by themselves, a grim nod to Houdini's death from peritonitis, which is caused by a ruptured appendix and involves severe internal fluid buildup. As one paranormal investigator who spent nights documenting the property noted, Houdini could break out of any jail cell on Earth, and it seems death is the only lock he hasn't quite picked yet. The data collected at the mansion suggests a highly intelligent entity that is manipulating the physical world almost as if it is showing off its mastery over matter. When you think about it, that is exactly what Houdini spent his entire career doing, proving to the world that nothing could hold him. The most jaw-dropping evidence surfaced recently during a séance conducted by a world-renowned medium in 2013. The audio equipment in the room picked up a voice that no one heard at the time, a gravelly whisper that clearly said, "Bess, I am waiting." It is a heartbreaking reference to his wife and the decade of failed attempts they made to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Property managers warn that the energy shifts from spooky to aggressive around Halloween, the anniversary of his death, with intensity levels spiking off the charts. Several witnesses claim to have seen a full-bodied apparition of a man in a 1920s tuxedo standing silently by the pool, staring into the water. He looks as solid as a real person, but the moment anyone tries to walk up to him, he dissolves into thin air like a final magic trick. You would think this reputation would scare people off, but in Hollywood, notoriety sells. The estate is now a top-tier rental for edgy film shoots, music videos, and exclusive parties. The leasing agents legally have to warn renters about the history, and sure enough, most guests end up reporting their own terrifying encounters before their lease is up. One veteran location scout who has worked on multiple blockbuster sets at the mansion admitted, "There is a heaviness in that house that you just cannot scrub out." Production crews constantly deal with nightmares where expensive cameras glitch out, lights explode, and gear malfunctions for absolutely no logical reason. Fresh batteries drain to zero in seconds, and literally everyone on set reports the sensation of being watched, specifically in the den where Houdini used to map out his escapes. But if you think that is intense, let's head down south for number 5 on our list, Nicolas Cage's infamous purchase of the LaLaurie Mansion in New Orleans. While we usually associate celebrity hauntings with the Hollywood Hills, the crown jewel of cursed real estate is actually located deep in the French Quarter. The massive LaLaurie Mansion, built in 1832, was the personal playground of a socialite named Delphine LaLaurie, a woman whose name is now synonymous with pure evil. She tortured and murdered countless enslaved people in a secret attic torture chamber that was only discovered when a fire broke out in 1834 and exposed her crimes. In 2007, actor Nicolas Cage, who is famous for collecting eccentric and occult items, decided to buy this house of horrors for $3.45 million. What is truly wild is how quickly Cage, who has owned haunted castles before, absolutely panicked and fled from this specific property. He put the mansion back on the market within a few years, and rumour has it he refused to spend more than a handful of nights actually sleeping under that roof. While Cage has remained tight-lipped about the specifics, local tour guides and neighbours say the paranormal activity inside is some of the most violent in America. It is not just bumps in the night. People report hearing the distinct sound of heavy chains dragging across the floorboards and blood-curdling screams echoing from empty rooms. Passers-by on Royal Street frequently report seeing full-bodied apparitions of injured people flickering in the windows before vanishing. Even a guy like Nicolas Cage, who collects dinosaur skulls and shrunken heads, couldn't handle the chaotic, dark energy that permeates those walls. According to local paranormal experts, the haunting isn't just a residual recording of the past. It is an active, intelligent and angry presence. Construction workers have reported heavy tools, disappearing personal items being rearranged, and the terrifying sensation of invisible hands grabbing them. The darkness of the history here makes the haunting significantly more disturbing than your average ghost story. When responders kicked down the doors during that 1834 fire, they found a scene so gruesome it shocked the entire city of New Orleans. LaLaurie had been using human beings for amateur medical experiments, subjecting them to surgeries without anaesthesia in a hidden dungeon. Investigators believe the spirits of those victims are trapped in the structure, and EVP recordings often capture clear, distinct pleas for help. These electronic voice phenomena aren't just static. They are the sounds of people screaming in agony, frozen in time. Perhaps the most visceral report comes from visitors who are suddenly hit with the overpowering scent of burning flesh and decay that fills the room before disappearing. Multiple past owners have described waking up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, feeling a heavy weight on their chest, as if they are suffocating in smoke. It is believed to be a sensory reenactment of the fire that originally exposed the mansion's secrets nearly 2 centuries ago. Even though Nicolas Cage's ownership was brief, his terrified retreat has only added another layer of infamy to the legend of the LaLaurie mansion. During the renovations under his brief ownership, the construction crew didn't just deal with old wiring. They reported being stalked by a spectral man in 18th century garb who watched them from the shadows of the empty rooms. It escalated quickly, with tools hurling across the room by themselves and the terrifying sound of hushed conversations in French, the very language of Madame LaLaurie, and her tortured victims echoing through the halls. As of 2026, the LaLaurie mansion has reverted to a private residence, though it remains a pilgrimage site for ghost hunters who snap photos of the cursed exterior from the sidewalk. Many of them don't linger long, reporting sudden waves of nausea and an overwhelming sense of dread that hits them the moment they stand near the property's dark aura. It reminds you of those old industry sayings about sitting pretty in the catbird seat. You know exactly how the tabloids love to spin those power dynamics into legendary myths. It was an era of polite, scripted pleasantries, like asking if a mother would enjoy a new puppy, all while completely ignoring the rot festering beneath the floorboards. This brings us to number 6, the infamous Ozzie and Harriet Nelson house, located at 1822 Camino Palmero Street. For millions of viewers glued to their sets in the 1950s and 60s, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet wasn't just a show. It was the blueprint for the flawless, wholesome American family. The sitcom blurred the lines of reality by starring the actual Nelson clan in a heavily sanitised reenactment of their existence, filming much of it inside their real-life Hollywood Hills sanctuary. But when the cameras stopped rolling, the picture-perfect image shattered, revealing darker truths and apparently spirits that stubbornly refused to vacate the premises. Following Ozzie Nelson's death in 1975, the deed to the house passed through several hands, with none of the new owners finding much peace. Every single new resident reported unexplainable paranormal phenomena, specifically aggressive activity clustered around Ozzie's old master suite and his private study. The most frequent and chilling manifestation is the phantom sound of Ozzie's typewriter furiously clacking away in the dead of night, despite the fact that the machine has been gone for decades. One rattled former owner who endured the house during the 1990s described it as living in a twisted reality where TV's perfect family is still performing for an empty room. They claimed the distinct smell of Ozzy's pipe tobacco would suddenly fill the office when no smokers were present, while Harriet's humming could be heard drifting from the kitchen. And on the rarest, most terrifying occasions, they would catch peripheral glimpses of the couple going about their routine as if the living tenants were the ghosts haunting their eternal set. As time went on, the haunting became more specific, with owners describing the ghost of Harriet Nelson pacing frantically in the master bedroom, looking distressed and searching for something lost. The apparition reportedly follows a rigid, obsessive path from the bed to the window, then to the closet and back again, repeating this loop of anxiety for hours before finally dissolving. However, the most disturbing aspect of the haunting involves the creeping sensation of being intensely scrutinised during private family moments. Several residents have confessed to feeling as though invisible critics were seated right at their dinner table, silently judging their conversation and etiquette. During holiday gatherings, the atmosphere becomes heavy, as if the Nelsons have assembled in the living room to watch the current occupants disappointed that they aren't living up to the script's wholesome standards. There is an undeniable suffocating heaviness that permeates the air of that house. That was the verdict of a paranormal investigator who conducted a thorough research session on the property back in 2010. The presence isn't necessarily violent or threatening, but it is relentless and persistent, refusing to fade away. Their technical equipment logged massive unexplained temperature plunges of 15 to 20 degrees in seconds, while cameras captured anomalous mists and orbs that defied natural explanation. Cementing the property's spooky reputation are the reports of doors swinging wide open or slamming shut entirely on their own accord. This activity seems to spike during family arguments, almost as if the ghosts are trying to enforce the conflict-free harmony they portrayed on television, a perfection they likely never achieved in life. But as we move from sitcom perfection to Hollywood tragedy, the stories only get darker. Number 7 takes us to the site of a true Tinseltown mystery, the George Reeves home at 1579 Benedict Canyon Drive. The suspicious death of George Reeves, the man who donned the cape for the 1950s Superman series, remains one of the industry's most debated cold cases. Although he was found dead from a gunshot wound on June 16, 1959, and the police ruled it a suicide, rumours of murder have swirled around the case for over half a century. Regardless of the truth behind his final moments, a dark and heavy energy seems permanently etched into the walls where Reeves took his last breath. Subsequent owners have all complained about a persistent, unnatural cold spot anchored at the foot of the stairs, the exact location where the actor's body was discovered. This specific zone remains noticeably frigid compared to the rest of the house, completely immune to the efforts of modern heating and cooling systems. In a detail straight out of a horror film, multiple residents have reported looking into mirrors and seeing a tall figure in a Superman costume standing behind them, visible only in the reflection. When the terrified observer spins around to confront the intruder, the room is empty, leaving them to question their own sanity. Yet the moment they turn back to the glass, the figure returns. The Man of Steel, never really checked out, as one tenant from the 1980s claimed. The auditory hauntings are just as intense, with residents hearing heavy masculine footsteps stomping across the upper floors when the house is known to be empty. Sometimes in the dead of night, the silence is shattered by the deafening sound of a single gunshot that jolts the entire household awake in terror. But when they investigate, nothing is out of place. The house is silent and undisturbed, as if the tragedy is replaying on an invisible loop. The bedroom where Reeves spent his final nights reportedly feels so cold that house guests refuse to sleep there, often citing the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of the bed. Several visitors have reported waking up to find a man dressed in an old-fashioned smoking jacket looming over them. This attire matches what Reeves was wearing on the night of his death, and the apparition stands at the foot of the bed before vanishing the moment anyone tries to speak to it. Perhaps the most gruesome detail involves the reports of phantom bloodstains that mysteriously seep through the bedroom carpet in the exact spot where the body lay. No matter how many times cleaning crews scrub the floor or replace the carpet, the crimson stains allegedly reappear days or weeks later, a bloody reminder that some Hollywood legends never die. Things get particularly spooky when June rolls around, marking the grim anniversary of Reeves's passing, with the atmosphere in the house becoming noticeably heavier. Even the most hardened skeptics have walked away shaking, claiming they have witnessed things that defy all logical explanation during those specific weeks. Ghost hunting squads have picked up chilling electronic voice phenomena right in the master bedroom, capturing a male voice distinctly whispering, "This isn't what happened." And then there is the whisper that says, "Look closer." A terrifying nugget of evidence for those who refuse to believe the official suicide narrative and suspect foul play was involved. Moving on to number 8, we head over to the legendary Brentwood abode at 12305 5th Helena Drive. This isn't your typical looming Gothic castle. It is a quaint Spanish-style hacienda where the world's most famous blonde bombshell spent her final tragic moments back in 1962, yet it hardly looks like a house of horrors. From the curb, the modest exterior looks completely innocent, giving away absolutely zero clues about the heartbreaking drama that unfolded behind those walls. But don't let the cosy vibe fool you, because many believe the restless soul of the screen legend is still very much at home. Marilyn had actually just bought the place a few months prior, marking the very first time she held the deed to a property all on her own, signifying a new independence. Tragically, her fresh start was cut short on August 5th, 1962, when she was discovered lifeless in her quarters, with the official report citing a probable suicide via barbiturate overdose. While the tabloids and conspiracy theorists have never stopped arguing over how she really died, the people who have lived there since tell a different story, one of relentless supernatural activity focused squarely on her old suite. The most frequent spine chiller involves catching a glimpse of the starlet herself, reflecting back from mirrors and window panes throughout the house. Witnesses describe a pale, ethereal figure with that signature platinum hair, wrapped in a white robe, who vanishes into thin air the second you try to focus on her. One housekeeper who maintained the estate during the 1990s put it bluntly, claiming the icon still wants to be seen and hasn't left the spotlight. She described chilling encounters, saying, "I would be in the middle of dusting when the temperature would plummet, even in the middle of a heat wave. Then I would catch her reflection just for a heartbeat, but crystal clear." It wasn't a scary sight, but a heartbreaking one. She always appeared profoundly sad and completely lost in her own home. It gets weirder. Multiple residents have complained about the electrical grid going haywire, lights flickering and stereos blasting right at 3 o'clock in the morning, the exact time the coroner estimated she passed away. It happens with such clockwork precision that previous owners eventually gave up on calling electricians and just started unplugging everything before hitting the sack to get a decent night's sleep. Guests who step foot inside often describe getting hit by a truckload of emotions that have nothing to do with their own current mood. We are talking sudden crushing waves of depression or panic that grip you tight and then evaporate the moment you step off the property line. Mediums who have investigated the site believe this is a residual, haunting emotional scars left behind by Monroe during those final spiralling days of her life. But the creepiest detail has to be the phantom scents that drift through the hallways out of nowhere, confusing everyone present. You will catch a whiff of her trademark Chanel No. 5 in rooms that have been vacant all day, or worse, the sharp chemical sting of chloral hydrate, one of the drugs found in her toxicity report. The master bedroom remains the epicenter, reportedly staying unnaturally frigid, with guests complaining they feel a heavy gaze on them while they try to doze off. Some have even woken up in a cold sweat to see a blonde figure sitting at the vanity table, endlessly brushing her hair, only for her to dissolve when they speak up. The house has undergone plenty of facelifts and renovations over the last 60 plus years, but the heavy atmosphere hasn't shifted one bit. The haunting seems baked into the soil itself, proving that no amount of remodelling can evict a spirit that is this attached to the location. In fact, Marilyn seems to get more active and agitated whenever construction crews come in to change things up. It is almost as if she is sticking around to supervise, curious about what they are doing to the only place she ever truly called home. Coming in at number 9. We have the infamous Valentino Mansion, also known as Falcon Lair, sitting high up at 1436 Bella Drive, the former kingdom of the silent film era's biggest heartthrob. Rudolph Valentino snagged this massive Benedict Canyon estate back in 1925 and dubbed it Falcon Lair, a nod to a movie project called The Hooded Falcon that sadly never got made. Even though he only got to enjoy the palace for a single year before his tragic death at just 31, his energy apparently refused to check out, remaining tethered to the symbol of his Hollywood dominance. Over the decades, everyone from new owners to the cleaning staff has reported run-ins with what they are convinced is the ghost of the Latin lover himself. He usually manifests as a dark-haired, dashing figure dressed to the nines in 1920s, fashion lingering for a moment before fading away. You are most likely to catch him striking a pose on the grand staircase or hanging out in what used to be his private master suite. One caretaker from the 1970s swore that Hollywood's original sex symbol was still lurking in the corners, watching over his domain. He claimed I would look up and see him stationed at the top of the stairs, just staring down. It wasn't menacing, just intensely watchful. It was never about scaring people. It felt more like he was the landlord making sure the current tenants were treating his masterpiece with respect. But he is not alone. People report hearing the ghostly paws of Valentino's favourite Doberman Pinscher trotting alongside him. You can hear the distinct click-clack of claws on the hardwood, followed by the undeniable sensation of a large, invisible dog brushing against your legs. Some guests have even jumped after feeling a cold, wet nose nudge their hand, only to look down and see absolutely nothing there. Then there is the auditory phenomena, the faint sounds of jazz-age music and laughter drifting out of empty rooms when the sun goes down. Security guards on the night shift have described hearing full-blown parties complete with clinking champagne glasses and the murmur of a lively crowd. Specifically, the rhythmic beats of tango music, Valentino's absolute favourite, will start playing, but when guards rush to check the source, they find dead silence. Interestingly, it seems the ladies get a bit more attention. Female guests consistently report far more paranormal encounters at the estate than the men do. While the ladies get the romance, the men visiting the property report a much more unsettling experience, often describing the heavy, oppressive feeling of an invisible man standing right in their personal space, breathing down their necks while the distinct, musky scent of a 1920s style cologne fills the air. On the other hand, female visitors frequently tell a more scandalous story, claiming to feel a phantom hand gently stroking their cheek or grazing their skin when they are alone in the rooms, a ghostly flirtation from a spirit that still fancies himself a ladies' man. You might think demolishing the place would get rid of the energy, but you would be wrong. Even though the original lavish estate was bulldozed to the ground back in 1953, leaving only the garage and a few scraps standing, the paranormal chaos didn't stop for a second in the new house built on that cursed soil. This relentless activity points to a fascinating, if slightly terrifying, conclusion about celebrity hauntings. It seems that Valentino's obsession isn't with the bricks and mortar of his old house, but rather he is spiritually tethered to the very land itself, haunting the dirt of Beverly Hills, regardless of what structure sits on top of it. As one expert on the supernatural observed, after investigating the grounds, there are certain Hollywood legends who possess such intense star power that their vibrations remain stamped on the atmosphere long after they have taken their final bow. The tragedy of Valentino dropping dead so suddenly while he was the biggest heartthrob on the planet seems to have generated a massive amount of unresolved spiritual energy. It is the restless soul of a superstar who refuses to accept that the credits have rolled and his time in the spotlight is over. Now let's switch gears to a monster of a different kind. Coming in at number 10, we have the chilling case of Bela Lugosi's apartment at 5620 Harold Way. It is shocking to think that the man who defined Count Dracula for the entire world spent his final twilight years living in this surprisingly humble, nondescript apartment complex in Hollywood. The line between the actor and the vampire blurred completely by the end. When he passed away in 1956, Lugosi was actually laid to rest, wearing his iconic Dracula cape per his own bizarre instructions. That specific request really highlights just how deeply he had merged with his on-screen persona, literally taking the character of the Count with him into the grave. And if the terrified reports from the people who moved in after him are anything to go by, it appears that Lugosi's spirit never bothered to break character, even after crossing over to the other side. Over the decades, a parade of residents living in Lugosi's old unit have come forward with eerily consistent stories about the frightening things that happen once the sun goes down. First, there is the smell. The heavy, choking stench of pipe tobacco, which Lugosi smoked constantly appearing out of nowhere in a closed room, followed instantly by a presence manifesting. Tenants describe the terrifying sensation of a tall, imposing figure looming in the doorway, staring them down, while the temperature in the apartment plummets to freezing cold in a matter of seconds. One shaken tenant who lived there during the 1980s summed it up perfectly, saying that there are some rolls deeply cursed enough that you can never truly wash them off. She described waking up in a cold sweat in the dead of night, paralysed by the feeling of an intruder, and seeing a tall, gaunt silhouette positioned in the doorframe, silently observing her. But the moment she scrambled to flip on the light switch, the figure would vanish into thin air, leaving the room ice cold and reeking of that old-fashioned stale tobacco smoke. It gets creepier. Multiple people have sworn they have seen a figure swirling a cape in their peripheral vision, a shadow that darts away the second you try to look at it directly. This apparition loves the drama, often spotted gazing out the windows at the Hollywood skyline, or in the most nightmare-inducing accounts standing silently at the foot of the bed while the tenant is trying to sleep. However, the visual scares are nothing compared to the auditory ones. The most disturbing reports involve a deep, guttural voice echoing through the empty apartment. Imagine being home alone and hearing a thick, Hungarian-accented whisper drift through the air, repeating the same bone-chilling phrase, "I am Dracula." It is Lugosi's most famous line, delivered softly right behind your ear, a ghostly performance for an audience of one in a dark room. The entity also likes to mess with electronics, with lights flickering violently for no reason, and television sets turning themselves on at full volume to static snow in the middle of the night. Many of the locals believe these aren't just random hauntings, but expressions of Lugosi's bitter frustration from beyond the grave. He died feeling trapped, typecast, and unable to escape the shadow of the vampire role that made him a legend, but also ruined his career, and now he seems to be acting out that tragedy forever. Of course, the building management tries to keep a lid on the stories to avoid scaring off potential renters, but they have a notoriously hard time keeping anyone in that unit for more than a few months. It is a revolving door of tenants who sign a lease and then desperately break it shortly after moving in, willing to lose their deposit just to get out. They usually give vague excuses about personal reasons or job transfers, but it is pretty obvious they are fleeing because they can't handle the roommate who refuses to leave. A former resident put it best, describing the vibe as living with someone who is completely in denial about the fact that they are dead. It feels like Lugosi is just carrying on with his mundane daily existence, pacing the floors, smoking his pipe and rehearsing his lines, totally oblivious to the fact that he is terrifying the living daylights out of the current occupants. Now let's move from the dark and brooding to the glitzy and fabulous with this piano-shaped bar. Welcome to number 11. We are heading to Las Vegas for the Liberace Mansion, located at 4982 Shirley Street. You cannot have a list of celebrity haunts without including the King of Bling. Although it's not in Hollywood, this Vegas estate is legendary because it's where the flamboyant superstar lived until he passed from AIDS complications in 1987. The world-famous pianist, known for his dripping diamonds, massive fur coats and theatrical entrances, apparently decided that death was no reason to stop the show. It seems the entertainer has held on to his flair for the dramatic, bringing his signature extravagance into the afterlife. New owners and guests staying at the mansion have frequently reported hearing the distinct sound of a piano playing loudly in the middle of the night when the house is supposed to be asleep. We aren't talking about simple scales, but complex concert-level concertos played with the speed and virtuosity that only Liberace possessed. The phantom music almost always emanates from the specific room where he kept his beloved mirrored Baldwin grand piano, continuing to play even years after the actual instrument was sold off and removed from the house. A security guard who used to patrol the grounds during its time as an event venue said it felt like the main act never actually left the building. He claimed that while doing his rounds at 2 or 3 in the morning, the silence would be broken by crystal clear classical music performed with that unmistakable show business flourish that Liberace was famous for. He would rush to check the room, finding it completely empty and silent, but the moment he turned his back and walked down the hall, the private concert would start up all over again. Even more spectacular are the visual manifestations witnesses describe seeing a glowing, shimmering figure decked out in sequined clothing gliding through the corridors. The spirit is often seen standing by the windows, gazing longingly out at the fountains in the courtyard, or simply making a grand entrance in the hallways. Unlike the darker ghosts, this apparition is usually described as being surrounded by a soft golden aura fading slowly from view, like a star walking off stage into the spotlight. Paranormal experts who have dared to investigate the estate have logged some seriously bone-chilling phenomena, specifically identifying intense cold pockets that plague the mansion, with the most extreme activity centred in the showman's former master suite and the opulent bathroom where he reportedly took his final breaths. We are talking about massive unexplained plunges in temperature here, where the air suddenly drops by 15 or even 20 degrees compared to the rest of the house, leaving architects and engineers completely baffled, since there are no drafts or structural flaws to explain it. If you try to bring modern tech inside, good luck equipment fails constantly, with cameras picking up bizarre static interference and fresh batteries draining from 100% to dead in seconds, almost as if something is leeching the power right out of them. Multiple ghost hunting crews have managed to capture distinct electronic voice phenomena on their recorders, picking up the eerie sounds of a male voice quietly humming a tune or letting out a soft, amused chuckle when the room is empty. These audio captures are not just random noise. They sound exactly like Liberace's famous distinctive laugh, matching his known mannerisms perfectly. But the most theatrical evidence, totally on brand for the legendary performer, are the phantom scents that drift through the halls. Witnesses suddenly smell heavy doses of expensive cologne burning candle wax and the crisp aroma of champagne that fills the air before vanishing instantly. These smells usually hit you right when the temperature nosedives, accompanied by the creeping sensation that someone is standing right next to you or brushing past, even though you are completely alone in the room. One psychic who toured the property summed it up perfectly, noting that Liberace absolutely lived for the spotlight and thrived on being the centre of attention every single day of his life. So why would a little thing like death stop the show? The vibe inside those walls is not tragic or angry like a typical haunting. It feels performative, energetic and full of flair. It honestly feels like he is still playing the ultimate host, desperate to dazzle, shock and entertain every single person who steps foot into his eternal sanctuary. Number 12 takes us to 9820 Eastern Drive, better known as the infamous Paul Byrne House. This stunning Spanish-style estate was once the home of high-powered MGM producer Paul Byrne, but it is now legendary for the mysterious and shady circumstances surrounding his untimely death. The tragedy struck just 2 months after Byrne married the platinum-blonde Hollywood icon Jean Harlow in 1932, and ever since that fatal night, the property has been a magnet for endless misfortune and intense paranormal activity. When authorities discovered Byrne's body, the case was quickly and controversially ruled a suicide, shutting down the official investigation almost immediately. The scene was graphic. He was found completely naked with a gunshot wound to the head, and nearby lay a dramatic note that read, "Dearest dear, unfortunately this is the only way to make good the frightful wrong I have done you and to wipe out my abject humiliation." However, the Hollywood rumour mill never bought the official story. Many insiders believed he was murdered, with the prime suspect being his ex-common law wife, who conveniently committed suicide just 2 days after Byrne died. Regardless of what actually went down that night, the mansion seems to have absorbed every ounce of the violence and trauma, locking that negative energy inside its walls forever. People who have owned the place in the decades since report terrifying auditory hallucinations, hearing the crack of a gunshot around 3 a.m, the time of death followed by heavy footsteps and the sickening thud of a body hitting the floor A tenant who lived in the home during the 1970s was convinced the spirit was trying to set the record straight, claiming, "Someone wants their version of the story told." The spooky action is not random. It almost always centres around the master bedroom, the exact location where Byrne breathed his last. Residents describe getting hit by sudden freezing blasts of air, hearing the hushed tones of invisible people arguing, and waking up to find objects on the nightstand where the suicide note was found, moved around by unseen hands. That specific bedroom reportedly never warms up, remaining perpetually cold and uncomfortable, with terrified guests claiming they have felt invisible hands grabbing or touching them while they tried to sleep. Even more disturbing, many witnesses have woken up to see a spectral figure standing at the foot of the bed, dressed in 1930s style pyjamas, staring them down intensely before dissolving into thin air. But the curse on this property did not stop with Byrne. The house's dark legacy is compounded by two other tragic deaths linked to its owners. Celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, who owned the house in the 1960s, was brutally murdered alongside Sharon Tate at Cielo Drive by the Manson family in 1969, adding another layer of grim history to the estate. Then in the 1970s, another owner met a tragic end right on the premises, reportedly drowning in the mansion's swimming pool under sad circumstances. It is like these layers of tragedy have stacked up to create a super haunted location where visitors do not just see one ghost, but report encountering several different apparitions roaming the grounds. You have got Byrne lurking in the bedroom and hauls a ghostly woman who looks just like Jean Harlow drifting near the staircase, and a guy in 1960s attire believed to be Sebring hanging out by the pool area. Paranormal teams sweeping the property have walked away with a collection of chilling electronic voice phenomena that support these claims. The most disturbing recordings include a man's voice in the bedroom clearly whispering, "I didn't do this to myself," and the heartbreaking sound of a woman sobbing uncontrollably near the stairs. Just like the Liberace estate, this house suffers from massive temperature swings, dropping 15 to 20 degrees in seconds without any logical or natural explanation. A former caretaker summed up the atmosphere perfectly, saying, "There is an oppressive heaviness in that house that never lifts no matter what you do. Even when the California sun is blazing outside, the interior feels dim and shadowed, like a dark cloud is permanently parked over the estate." It really feels like the walls themselves soaked up the pain and confusion from that night in 1932, and they are desperately trying to replay the truth of what actually happened. Coming in at number 13 is the infamous Los Feliz murder house, also known as the Griffith Park Curse Mansion, located at 2475 Glendower Place. The true horror story began on the morning of December the 6th, 1959, involving a man named Dr. Harold Perelson. Perelson was a prominent and respected heart specialist, but that morning he snapped, taking a ball-peen hammer and brutally bludgeoning his wife to death while she slept. He then attacked his teenage daughter, leaving her severely injured, but she miraculously managed to escape and run for help before Perelson ended his own life by drinking a glass of acid. The detail that really messes with people's heads is what happened in between. After the attacks, but before killing himself, Perelson calmly sat down in his living room and started reading a magazine like nothing had happened. This nightmare scenario cemented the home's reputation as one of Los Angeles' most terrifying haunts. A massive Spanish revival estate that was left virtually abandoned, freezing that bloody moment in time for decades. A year after the slaughter, the Enriquez family bought the property at an auction. But here is the kicker: they never actually moved in. Instead of living there, they used the murder mansion as a glorified storage unit for boxes, keeping it that way until they eventually passed away themselves. Because of this neglect, the house became a literal time capsule of horror, preserving the 1950s aesthetic perfectly behind its locked doors. Peeking through the windows, people could see 1950s furniture, holiday decorations, and even wrapped Christmas presents sitting there for over 50 years, gathering thick layers of dust while the legend of the house grew darker. A neighbour who has lived across the street since the 70s put it best: "It was never just a murder case. It was a haunting that started that night and simply never stopped." Neighbours reported seeing flickering lights dancing behind the curtains at ungodly hours, even though the property was completely abandoned, while the silence of the night was constantly shattered by inexplicable shouting matches and shattering glass coming from a home where nobody lived. Brave souls who crept up to the dusty panes claimed it was like walking onto a movie set where the director just yelled, "Cut!" Everything was perfectly preserved, as if the owners had just stepped out for a pack of smokes and never came back. Over the decades, the handful of individuals lucky or unlucky enough to slip past the gates have all corroborated the same terrifying narrative regarding the estate's supernatural activity. Witnesses describe a nauseating stench of decaying lilies that hits you instantly, followed by bone-chilling cold spots and the distinct unnerving sound of a male voice rambling incoherently in the darkness. Listen closely and you can hear the tortured soul repeating a single heartbreaking phrase on an endless loop. No more, no more, no more. Even more disturbing are the visual manifestations. Trespassers have sworn they saw a spectral figure clad in old-fashioned sleepwear looming at the staircase landing, glaring down with a twisted mix of bewilderment and rage before fading into thin air. Then there are the reports that would make your skin crawl visions of a woman's lifeless corpse sprawled across the master bed, a grisly tableau that vanishes the second you try to focus your eyes on it. The fact that the mansion remained hermetically sealed for so long only added fuel to the fire, turning it into a magnet for the curious. Crowds of urban explorers and amateur ghost hunters were constantly desperate to crack its secrets despite the no trespassing signs. Most who managed to break in didn't stay long, scrambling back out with tales of a heavy, suffocating atmosphere that made them physically sick to their stomachs, as if the house itself was rejecting them. One paranormal expert who secured legal entry back in 2009 put it bluntly, "I've been to dozens of alleged haunts across the country, but this place is in a league of its own." He described the vibe as stepping into a meat locker, but the chill wasn't just temperature related. It was a profound emotional freeze that penetrated right to the bone. It felt as though every ounce of joy, hope and light had been violently vacuumed out of the atmosphere, leaving only despair behind. Their high-tech gear went haywire immediately, with fresh batteries dying in seconds, while the entire crew was paralysed by the sensation of being stalked by a malevolent, unseen predator. After rotting away in silence for years, the estate finally changed hands in 2016, but the new owner's attempts at renovation have been anything but smooth sailing. The construction crew brought in to modernise the place has been plagued by a series of freak occurrences that defy logical explanation. We're talking about heavy power tools vanishing into thin air only to turn up in locked rooms, the heavy thud of phantom boots trailing workers down hallways, and that same relentless feeling of being glared at from the top of that cursed staircase. Number 14 takes us to a legendary spot on the coast, the Madonna Inn's infamous haunted suite located at 100 Madonna Road in San Luis Obispo. While the hotel is globally famous for its kitschy hot pink aesthetic and over-the-top themed suites, room 609 holds a dark secret. It sits directly atop a grisly murder scene, making it a bucket list destination for Hollywood's thrill seekers. It might not be a private mansion, but don't be fooled. This specific room has seen more A-list foot traffic than most red carpets over the years. This specific suite has become a rite of passage for stars looking to dabble in the dark side. Countless famous faces check in, hoping for a spooky story to tell on talk shows, only to end up fleeing the premises in their pyjamas in the dead of night, terrified out of their minds. The local gossip is that a woman met a violent, bloody end on this very soil long before the inn was constructed, and her restless spirit refuses to move on. VIPs and regular guests alike who spend a night in room 609 all seem to leave with identical spine-tingling horror stories. They talk about waking up to the feeling of eyes burning into them, bathroom lights flickering like a disco, and the terrifying sensation of icy, invisible fingers grazing their cheeks or stroking their hair. One prominent Hollywood actress who stayed there back in the 1990s spilled the tea on what really happens behind the colourful facade, claiming the fun hotel hides a nightmare. Speaking on condition of anonymity, she confessed, "I jolted awake at exactly 3 a.m. because the mattress depressed exactly as if a person had just sat down on the edge of my bed." When I finally worked up the courage to open my eyes, I saw a woman standing silently by the window, just locking eyes with me. She didn't feel evil, just incredibly sorrowful. But the second I hit the light switch, she evaporated, leaving the room frigid, even though the heater was blasting full force. The housekeeping staff has a massive logbook filled with hundreds of these encounters, all describing the exact same ghostly figure. She's always described as wearing a flowing white nightgown with long, jet black hair, usually hovering near the drapes or blocking the entrance to the bathroom. Technology doesn't stand a chance in there either, with guests constantly complaining that their fully charged smartphones are completely dead by morning. Even creepier, the bedside alarm clocks have a nasty habit of resetting themselves to flash 3 o'clock in the morning, the alleged time the original murder took place. But the absolute scariest detail, guests waking up to find the words, "Help me," scrawled into the condensation on the bathroom mirror, even when nobody has turned on the shower. The maids also whisper that room 609 is perpetually 10 degrees colder than any other suite in the building, no matter what the thermostat says. Plus, high-maintenance stars have freaked out finding their expensive jewellery and personal items completely rearranged while they slept. A former manager spilled the beans, admitting, "We have huge celebrities book that specific room for the clout, only to come running to the front desk demanding to check out a few hours later." There was this one very famous actor, I literally can't say his name or I'd get sued, who showed up with his whole crew, laughing and making jokes about ghosts. 3 hours later, he was ghost white shaking and refused to say a single word about what he saw before peeling out of the parking lot. Nowadays, the hotel gives a subtle heads up to anyone booking room 609, marketing the haunting as a unique feature rather than admitting the place is terrified by the undead. Yet, whether it's despite the horror or because of it, that suite remains the absolute hardest reservation to snag at the entire inn. Especially when Halloween rolls around, you have to book years in advance. Moving on to number 15. We're heading to 640 South Main Street in Los Angeles to talk about the infamous Cecil Hotel. Okay, so it's not technically a celebrity mansion, but you simply cannot talk about Hollywood hauntings without bringing up the Cecil. This place is so drenched in blood tragedy and unsolved mystery that it has morphed into the ultimate dark tourism pilgrimage for stars obsessed with the macabre. Back in the roaring 20s, the Cecil wasn't just a building. It was the opulent crown jewel of downtown Los Angeles, screaming wealth and luxury. However, as the decades rolled on the neighborhood around it, collapsed into chaos, eventually transforming into the infamous and dangerous Skid Row we know today. For years, this place has basically served as a playground for the macabre, hosting a shocking number of brutal murders and unexplained fatalities. It even served as the temporary lair for absolute monsters like the terrifying Night Stalker Richard Ramirez and the Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger. But the story that really broke the internet and put this cursed location back on the global map happened in 2013. The heartbreaking and utterly baffling disappearance of Canadian tourist Elisa Lam captivated the entire world. The discovery of her remains was straight out of a horror movie script. Her body was eventually found floating inside one of the massive rooftop water tanks, but only after horrified guests started complaining that the tap water ran black and tasted absolutely foul. You have definitely seen the viral security footage of her final moments in the elevator. It shows her acting incredibly erratic, pressing buttons, hiding in corners, and gesturing to someone or something that wasn't there, sparking endless debates online. While authorities ruled it an accident, millions of web sleuths weren't buying it. The comment sections were on fire with theories that the footage showed undeniable proof of paranormal entities targeting her in those cursed halls. One seasoned ghost hunter who spent time investigating the property put it bluntly. This isn't a place with just one stray spirit. He claimed the building is housing an entire army of the undead, basically a grand central station for lost souls. The evidence they have collected is reportedly overwhelming, ranging from chilling electronic voice phenomena, screaming out from the silence, to terrifying shadow people caught lurking in the background of video recordings. They have also clocked wild temperature drops that science just cannot explain, turning warm rooms into freezing meat lockers in a split second without any open windows or air conditioning running. Even when management tried to slap a fresh coat of paint on the horrors and rename the place Stay on Main to trick budget travellers, the haunting didn't stop. Unsuspecting tourists kept reporting the exact same terrifying encounters as the previous generation. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night because invisible fingers are stroking your hair or grabbing your feet. People talk about hearing gut-wrenching sobs and hushed conversations coming from rooms that are supposedly locked and empty. It gets even worse in the corridors where guests frequently spot full-body apparitions staring them down only for the ghostly figures to dissolve into thin air the second anyone tries to get close to them. Now, here is the juicy Hollywood gossip part, rumour has it, that several adrenaline junkie A-listers obsessed with the occult have secretly checked in just to test their nerves against the building's evil reputation. While their publicists usually work overtime to keep these spooky sleepovers hush-hush, the few stars who have spilled the tea admit that the vibe inside is absolutely crushing, describing a heavy blanket of pure dread that never lifts. They mention hearing sounds that shouldn't exist and that distinct hair-raising feeling of being stalked down those long, narrow hallways by something you can't see but can definitely feel breathing down your neck. One famous horror director who actually stayed there for movie research dropped a chilling quote saying the place is basically a giant spiritual sponge that has been soaking up 80 years of trauma pain and absolute desperation. He described the atmosphere as having a physical weight to it, a heavy density that presses down on your chest the moment you walk through the doors, making it impossible to ignore the tragic history surrounding you. It is as if the bricks and mortar aren't just construction materials, but containers that are completely saturated with the suffering of every lost soul who ever checked in and never checked out. The real horror stories, though, come from the long-term residents who had to live there. They swear that electronics go haywire precisely at the witching hour of 3 a.m, with lights and televisions flickering on by themselves. Even more disturbing are the phantom sounds of heavy thuds against the pavement, grisly echoes of the many jumpers who ended their lives there, and seeing roommates in their peripheral vision who vanish the moment you say hello. Back in 2011, they tried to renovate parts of the building, but the construction crew nearly walked off the job because of the insane, unexplained incidents happening on the daily basis. We are talking about heavy tools vanishing into thin air workers being physically shoved by invisible hands while standing on tall ladders, and a sudden overpowering stench of rotting meat filling rooms that had just been stripped to the studs and cleaned. Even though it isn't taking typical hotel bookings right now, the Cecil stands tall as a grim monument to the twisted underbelly of Los Angeles, a constant looming reminder of the city's darkest shadows. It is like a massive battery that has charged itself on every single murder, suicide and overdose that occurred within its walls, holding on to that dark energy forever. All of this combines to create what paranormal experts and Hollywood insiders agree is hands down the most densely haunted, cursed piece of real estate in all of Southern California. Seriously, in the entire history of Tinseltown scandals and horrors, nothing else even comes close.